See, our friend Tommy Boy came up with 5 proofs that God exists. 5 handy-dandy little logical sequences that show definitively that there is a God. And if you examine them, they're actually all quite silly. Or, to put it more eloquently, they're fucking retarded.
I take issue with this on some level, particularly, I guess, calling Thomas Aquinas retarded would be the main point, but more to the point, you know, if you want to be a generally intelligent person, you have to read a lot. If you're going to call yourself the amazing atheist, then you really only have to read a few things. I mean, you probably have to delve into, like, broader ideas about philosophy, but you can get by just by reading kind of Christian philosophy and Islamic philosophy. So, I guess the biggest issue I take with this is the fact that the amazing atheist doesn't give the impression that he's read the Summa Theologica, and that is the type of thing that you would have thought if someone has read the Summa Theologica, they'd want to talk about how much they'd read it, you know. And of course, a lot of the Summa Theologica isn't necessarily worth taking into account, and I do agree that a lot of these arguments are rendered insignificant by scientific discovery since the time when Thomas Aquinas was alive. And this is probably going to be quite a short video because I'm kind of just going to address a few of the points the amazing atheist makes that are wrong here, while at the same time I do reject every single argument posited by Thomas Aquinas, but I think the amazing atheist completely misrepresents them, and I think he probably wouldn't misrepresent them anything like as much if he'd read the whole book, or read a Wikipedia article on each of the arguments. He seems to have just read the section of the Summa Theologica that deals with these arguments, which is a bit lazy, considering, I don't know, I mean, I believe you might even be the most subscribed atheist YouTuber, and I realize you've moved a bit away from atheism, but, you know, you kind of say you ought to let Dawkins deal with Aquinas and things like that, because Dawkins is quite a prominent atheist. I'm going to give you some credit here and say that you might be coming in at a solid 5th for sort of popular atheists. And even maybe even 4th. I mean, there's Dennett, Hitchens, Dawkins, and even in Hitchens, despite almost a cult following, I don't actually know that many people who know Hitchens that well. I also don't even know that many people who know Harris that well. But the 4th I might have posited was Dennett. Either way, a lot of people I know the amazing atheist. And you might say that's because I know quite a few young people, and yeah, it's true that I don't know many old people who know the amazing atheist, but at the same time I don't know many old people who know Hitchens and Sam Harris. I know most people know Dawkins. Still, you know, there is actually an onus on you to maybe try and grapple with this idea that you've been kind of placed in a position to represent, or represent the alternative to. If you're going to try and be an atheist, you ought to understand. I mean, I'll even let you off and just say Christianity and Islam, because, you know, maybe it's not really, you know, Western atheists can be let off for not dealing with a lot of Eastern conceptions of God, because, you know, I mean, it's a lot of effort. But still, I mean, you live in a Christian country, read, the Bible. I don't even know if you've read the Bible. Read the Summa Theologica. Read, I can't think of any more. I can only think of all the various catechisms. My mind's gone blank. I'm sorry, I'll try and remember it and put it in the description. I probably won't do that for a while. Generally, yeah. Try and read more of the book that you're critiquing the arguments of.
Aquinas' first argument, motion.
So, you didn't quite understand this argument, which is bad because you then respond to it, which... the response to it is actually quite easy, so it's kind of immaterial that you didn't respond to it, but at the same time you made a video to respond to Aquinas' arguments. I put down my chair. The unmoved mover is often conflated with the cosmological argument, the idea that everything that begins to exist has a cause, the universe began to exist, therefore the universe has a cause. That's not what the unmoved mover is talking about, because at the time it wasn't generally accepted that the universe did begin to exist. Certainly not in secular ideas of the universe. If you were secular, you basically tended to argue that the universe had always existed in some state. The unmoved mover can best be understood as a remote control car, and this remote control car keeps going well beyond, you know, any force that could push it. Keeps going as if it is self-containing. Okay, so the car is moving, and you say, what's moving that car? And you see that what is moving that car is actually the batteries in the car. So, you know, that's what we even talk about an unmoved mover. The batteries are unmoved, and yet they move the car. Now, in Thomas Aquinas' time, it was understood that the universe kind of, at least by, you know, again, by secular ideas, and Christian critical, and I assume some religious traditions. I don't know of many religious traditions that argue that the universe carried on going. There were probably some Christian traditions, but I don't quite know enough about Christian history to know about that. The idea that the universe just kept on going. So Thomas Aquinas was not arguing that the universe had a first cause. Instead, he was arguing that the universe had a constant force moving things. Aquinas understood that things couldn't just keep moving forever without running out of energy or running out of motion, and therefore he saw that there must be some force which constantly propels the various forces in the universe onwards. The wind moves forever. What's moving the wind? The Earth keeps rotating. What's rotating the Earth? Or the sun keeps rotating, as they would have understood it. I believe Aquinas believed the sun revolved around the Earth, so the sun keeps rotating. What's causing the sun to move? These are the types of ideas. It doesn't really relate to the first cause, because it doesn't presume that the universe began to exist. It suggests that perhaps the universe has always existed, perhaps there is an infinite regress. But if there is an infinite regress, then what is causing the universe to continue moving forever? Because there is no object that if you push it, it will carry on moving forever. Now, having said that, there is an obvious argument against this, which is the conservation of energy. So the idea that, yes, an object won't move forever, but movement actually comes about from other forces. So it comes about from chemical energy that you get from eating food, which can then cause you to push an object forward, and kind of all the energy sort of works out. So it's recyclable. And in that sense, I suppose you could argue, if you want to go back to Aquinas' sort of a way of understanding the universe is in perpetual motion. The universe is constantly moving because it's impossible for the universe to shed all of the energy that exists within it. and energy does not enter closed systems, nor can it leave them. Now, again, yes, this argument is rendered essentially invalid by what we now understand about science and about the kind of Big Bang, and how all energy came from one point and has since not disappeared but only been converted, nor has it appeared. But you did not address this argument, so you at least deserve some criticism for completely ignoring the argument.
Aquinas' second argument, causality. 1. Some events cause other events. That argument is exactly the same as your motion argument. I'm not refuting the same argument twice.
So I was going to try and go through and respond to at least something that's said in every single one of the refutations. Obviously here, I can't really do that because in the first argument he misunderstands it and conflates it with the causality argument. And then in the second argument he basically says that he's already disproven the causality argument. The causality argument is... I don't know if I'm going to give much of my opinion on that. What I will say about the causality argument is I find it to be a relatively uninteresting argument because it deals with how the universe came to exist. When people talk about the cosmological argument and things like that, they say, well, how did the universe come to exist from nothing? And I don't find that question interesting because of what's understood to be the anthropic principle, which is basically the idea that we're here. The only way we could be discussing these questions is if we came into existence, and you know, it's almost pointless to say, well, how did we come into existence? Because, you know, I mean, it's perhaps even 1 in a trillion chance that we would come into existence, but unless that 1 in a trillion chance happened, we wouldn't be here. That's kind of a very kind of broad, probably unsatisfactory way of explaining it. What I find more interesting about the kind of, not necessarily the cosmological argument, but a question that's posited by Christians is the question of why something exists as opposed to nothing. And that is a question that will bug me until the end of time, you know. Why do we exist? Why are we here? Why is it that the universe, or is perhaps even misleading to describe it in terms of the universe, why is it that reality did not consist of just nothing? Why is it that anything exists at all? That is a huge question. It's a question I find to be incredibly interesting and incredibly haunting. My issue with Christianity is I don't think Christianity necessarily explains that, because I think it does, that question in particular still leads to the question, why does God exist? You know, and I know that that kind of just saying what caused God is a question that Christians take issue with, and I do agree that it kind of, I haven't read all of the literature on the subject, but I do agree that it's probably a bit of a counter-refutation to what caused God. But I think the question of why God exists is still a huge question, you know. Even if you accept the supernatural as an explanation for why the natural exists, why does the supernatural exist? You know, why do we live in a universe where there is a God, as opposed to a universe where there isn't? In the same way, why do we live in a universe where there is existence as opposed to a universe where there isn't existence? So that's my issue with the cosmological argument. I do actually have broader issues with it. Although that's not necessarily the cosmological, that's my issue with the whole concept of the first cause, or the kind of explanation for reality. I don't think that theism satisfies me. And I suppose in my more curious moments, tremendously unsatisfied by the explanation that atheism or agnosticism offers for this, which is we don't know. But I would almost be equally unsatisfied by Christianity, because you're still left with these why questions. Why God? Why that morality? Why that way of dealing with humanity? Why did he pick this? Why did he do that? Why? There's so many whys. And I don't know, I take issue with even playing the why game when it comes to causality and, the origins of the universe and the origins of existence.
Aquinas' third argument, contingency.
I do feel a bit sleazy refuting this argument simply because I do reject it on several levels, but I will address a few points. You criticise the fact that it has not been demonstrated that certain forms of matter and other things that could be said to exist do not necessarily at any point cease to exist. This seems to be kind of ignoring the point, which is that, I think it's difficult to regard the universe in a sense of such fragility. What you're basically suggesting is, if you're not arguing that there is a point at which things in the universe have entirely ceased to exist, then what you're basically saying is, you're conceding the point that things in the universe could cease to exist, but just saying, oh, they simply haven't. And I think for a lot of people it is tough to accept the notion that the universe, or the existence within the universe, is that fragile, as if to say that at any moment, because of the inherent contingent nature of things in the universe might cease to exist. In order for there to be any kind of certainty regarding metaphysics and epistemology in the universe, you have to first ground your understanding of the universe in the idea that the universe could not suddenly cease to exist. You have to ground your understanding of the laws of mathematics and physics and logic in the belief. I've got a lot of fruit flies in my room. In the belief that the universe is solid. Contingency is, just for those who don't know, is basically the idea that, for example, my fist can be brought into existence by my consciousness, my muscles and things like that, and I can bring it out of existence, and boom, it's gone. My fist is very much contingent on a whole number of things ranging back infinitely. And I think a big problem with contingency is it's difficult to deal with practical examples, because, I might say that my fist is contingent on my mind, and then people might say, oh no, it's not, it's contingent on your finger muscles or other arm muscles. There aren't any muscles in your fingers, but arm muscles that cause your fingers to contract like that. And that's one of the issues with it's very difficult to find the exact points at which kind of the contingency connects to each step. The second point you make, which I take some issue with, is the idea that if the universe is contingent, then it doesn't need to be on a being. You basically just say, why does it need to be a being? Which I find to be a bit of a poor argument. There is we're talking about the whole universe being contingent on something, it would seem to follow that this something would have a consciousness. And I'm not necessarily suggesting for a moment that it needs to have a consciousness, but I do think the onus is on you to engage with the idea that it has a consciousness on a more sophisticated level, rather than just saying, well, I don't see any evidence, or I don't see any reason to believe it needs to have a consciousness. Give me 500,000 subscribers who want to hear me talk about atheism and religion, and I would probably dedicate a lot of time to refuting the idea of the argument from contingency. So I'm not really, I guess the point to take away from this is that I am satisfied with the refutation of the argument from contingency, but only so because I'd already rejected it. And I'm not going to go into why I failed to find a compelling argument, because I don't want to make this video too long. But, I don't see you convincing anyone who accepts the argument based on this, and I think in order to convince people who accept the argument, you would have to read the literature of people who do accept the argument. So, again, I disagree with, I suppose, the way you're approaching this. And again, my point still stands at the beginning, which I say is a strong point. The whole being thing is a bit more up in the air. It's just a minor criticism that I know.
Aquinas' fourth argument: properties that come in degrees.
This is actually a really bad argument. It's definitely the weakest, and therefore I'm not actually going to disagree with any of TJ's criticisms, but I am actually going to posit some better criticisms. Essentially, there are two ways of thinking of counter-criticism. The idea that Aquinas is basically building off here is the concept of forms, which is to say that by whatever concept we judge a item that exists, there must be some form of that item by which we are judging it. So, if I have, I don't have a pen, but I have something much more cool. So I have this plastic sword, then I'm not judging it according to what constitutes a good chair. I'm not, if someone takes out a sword in front of me, if someone does the whole, you call that a knife, this is a knife thing, I'm not going to walk up and go, no it's not. How am I supposed to sit on that? That's basically the idea of forms, The idea of forms is that whatever you're going to judge, you have to judge it according to this concept of its purpose and its innate being. And yet, as much as this argument plays off the idea of forms, it, in a sense, contradicts the idea of forms. And the reason why is because forms generally seem to play off the idea of the average, if you will. So, we don't judge humanity by looking at, we don't define someone's humanity as being in accordance with the smartest person. We don't say everyone has to be Stephen Hawking or Albert Einstein to be in line with humanity. And perhaps a better example of this would be, for example, if I walk outside and go, oh, it's really cold, I'm not suggesting that it's below absolute zero, or it's anything like close to absolute zero. I'm suggesting that relative to what I experience, it is cold, okay? And that is probably the biggest issue of Aquinas' ideas. He builds off this idea of kind of this innate sense of being, like everything has to kind of conform to this maximum ideal of thingness, if you want to understand forms of thingness. So, wine has wineness, toilet paper has toiletness, phones have phoneness, wallets have walletness, and all of this is to say that, you know, this isn't a bad wallet, and this isn't a good phone, you know. This is a phone because of its inherent phoneness, and we know this is a phone, and, you know, this, if this wallet turned into a phone, it wouldn't become a bad wallet, it would become a phone. That's my crude explanation of the concept of forms. And this is all of the ideas that Aquinas is building off. The trouble is that Aquinas does make the mistake of saying that there is a maximum of all of these quantities. I think a lot of people do treat this argument a bit like the moral argument, and they say things like, oh, God is the perfect standard of good, therefore God exists. And the moral argument is something I disagree with on a massive level. But I think even by the standards of most philosophers, this argument is the weakest argument, and for that reason I'm not going to criticise TJ at all. I'm just going to bring up what I consider to be the better argument, which is the criticism of Aquinas' dealing with forms, as opposed to TJ's argument, which is kind of just talking about how stupid Aquinas is for just talking about positive attributes. I will actually criticise one aspect of TJ's argument, which is that he says, he criticises Aquinas for saying God can only have positive attributes, okay? So to go back to the wallet and phone analogy, you know, the standard for a wallet is not a bad wallet. The standard for a phone is not a bad phone. You know, if someone throws a piece of scrap metal, this is my scrap metal. If someone throws a piece of scrap metal at me and says, "This is a bad phone," I'm not going to see this as the standard for what a phone should be. But if someone, this isn't a good phone, unfortunately, I don't have a good phone. There are some people out, like, kind of close to my room, but I don't want to walk out and have to edit the video of me just going, "Hey, can I have a phone?" and them giving me an iPhone or something, especially seeing as, I don't know, I don't see it going over well, because I assume they're drunk. I mean, drunker, according to the ultimate standard of drunkenness, they're drunk. So I probably wouldn't be able to get an iPhone or something, but suppose I had an iPhone, then I could say, this is what we judge a phone by, and then I make a remark about it being an Apple product placement and hopefully get some money. So, you know, it's not necessarily, it's not kind of theistic sycophancy to suggest that God is the ultimate standard of good, because when we use the term good and positive, we don't mean it in the ethical sense of the word, okay? So we're not saying, oh, God is the perfect phone, he's so good, I love it, he's just the best phone. What we're saying is, or what the argument is saying rather, is that God is just the standard phone. You know, the same way you have your, and I think this is an argument that's often brought up, you want to measure a distance, okay? How are you going to explain a distance to someone? What are you going to do? You're going to say, maybe, you're going to say, oh, it's, you know, like 10 times that, okay? That would be if you're a Philistine, okay? even then you are relating it to this physical concept. You're saying, this is a distance, and I want you to relate the distance I'm talking about to this. Whereas if you were less of a Philistine, you will relate it to the concept of miles and kilometres. So you would say, oh, it's I'm 60 miles north of London, so it will take you about this much time to reach me. You know, you've appealed to kind of the meter stick of distance, and God is the meter stick of being. He is the meter stick of forms. Every form you must relate to a perfect form, and the culmination of perfect forms we call God. Okay. Now, again, plenty of grounds to disagree with this argument, but it isn't invalid to infer that the culmination of perfect forms would be this phenomenal being, this incredible being. Then you would have to consider this also includes the culmination of humanity, the human form. You know, that's basically parts of the argument that TJ has misunderstood, and parts of the argument he's failed to address as accurately as he could. But none of this is to really defend the argument. I don't want anyone commenting, saying, oh no, the fourth argument is wrong because of this, this and this. I understand there are 1,000,001 valid arguments against the fourth proof of God. I'm just not going to address them right now. So,
Aquinas' fifth argument from design.
So I guess I'm going to bring up the thing that TJ doesn't address here, which is I changed my lighting, by the way, because I actually have a light up there, which I figured might be nice. I'm not sure. It probably looks a bit weird now because I've done the whole thing about it. An argument that TJ doesn't bring up, which kind of relates to placing this argument in its historical context, is sort of this Hellenistic approach to metaphysics, which basically relates to the idea that any physical property must automatically relate to a desire to conform to the results of that physical property. So, I'm trying to think of an example. I guess you could say a really big fire burns brighter because it wants to. You know, this was the way that a lot of Hellenistic philosophers, especially Aristotle, thought about metaphysics. And this kind of carries on into Aquinas' way of thinking, because he buys into this metaphysical assessment that judges things according to wanting to conform to certain standards. It means it's very easy for him to slot God into this paradigm. Now, the trouble is we now have very different ideas about metaphysics, and they do contradict the idea of God the same way that the ideas we now have about matter and energy contradict a lot of Aquinas' arguments for God. And I think that's kind of the bulk of the arguments that could be made. There was another point in particular that I was thinking about. Wait, let me just... okay, yeah, I remember now. Basically, I'm trying to phrase it correctly. There is no reason to believe on Aquinas that that working towards a purpose automatically entails a intelligent designer. at least not in the way that Aquinas means to imply, especially given his previous arguments. It is possible that something can work to a goal but be brought about by a very sort of inane, mechanistic designer, such as insects and things like that. You know, we see a lot of order in the world and a lot of beings working towards this kind of common goal, and they create a inanimate object that also works towards that goal. But it doesn't follow that the being has to be intelligent in any sense that we would really consider it. You know, it could be that a god exists, but if you were to meet a god, it might be that they're an insect, and it's kind of, they've built this ant colony that works towards a goal, and that ant colony is the universe. Those are the main criticisms of Aquinas' ideas. Again, I don't think I have much to say about TJ's response here, and I also feel that this video is running to be quite long, so I'm probably just going to cut this off now. The point is that, you know, it's not like TJ refuted this amazing series of arguments that are just completely beyond rebuttal, but at the same time, the rebuttal he did offer to these arguments kind of set back his academic integrity, and that's, I suppose, unfortunate, because, you know, he could have argued the case more substantially if he would have read kind of the background reading. But I guess I could end every single video I make the same way, which is to say that I wouldn't need to be here if people read the background reading, but they don't, and therefore I get a hobby. It's not even a job. I'm not even being paid for this, and I probably will never be paid for this as long as I continue to put out 30-minute videos that no one's gonna want to subscribe to in any kind of large number. But then I guess I choose to do it. So, thank you for giving me something to do with my life. And now I have to write an essay again. I always make these before I have to write an essay. It's almost like having to write an essay is the perfect procrastination I need before I continue to, or the perfect motivation I need before I procrastinate and respond to some arguments. Bye, everyone. In case you haven't realised, by the way, this is actually not a video I recorded before. Last time I made a video I said that I wouldn't record any more videos and I would just upload old videos. This is not one of those videos. This is a newly recorded video, so with that in mind, the point still stands that if you want to see me respond to any specific videos, then by all means, comment, like and subscribe. You don't need to, actually, yeah, like, you don't need to subscribe because there's not really any point. Let's see, do I have anything else to say? Yes,